Meter, and today I'm going to be talking about the temperance movement. So the temperance movement began in Europe in the 19th century, but it quickly spread to the US. So what the temperance movement was basically a push to ban alcohol, like the manufacturing, the selling, and the consumption of alcohol. The first movements were established in New York and Massachusetts, and a lot of these movements were led by women who saw firsthand the negative effects on alcohol. So if it negatively affected their husbands and the men in their community, then that's what really pushed them to start being advocates of the ban on alcohol. So alcohol was also blamed for a lot of health problems and the crime rate in the community, and so a lot of people just didn't think highly of alcohol to begin with. Alcoholic consumption was mostly due to the fact that the US was in such a high economic decline, and stress drinking kind of became something that was really popular in that time period. Also, drinking was just considered a way of life there. Oftentimes men were paid for their labor, not only with money but also with alcohol. Something that I found actually really interesting was that alcoholic drinks were often considered to be healthier than water because sometimes the water in the different communities was contaminated. So they believed that drinking alcohol was just altogether healthier for you than drinking the contaminated water. There was one big movement called the Women's Christian Temperance Movement, and it began in 1874 in Ohio. It became the largest women's organization in the US, and I think that this was because not only women, or basically it was because it was really easy to get into the union to become a member. All you had to do was sign a contract that said that you were going to abstain from alcohol completely, and you also had to pay 50 cents toward the organization's treasury, which doesn't seem like a lot to us, but back then it was a decent amount. Also, not only women were allowed to join, despite the name, men were actually encouraged to join as well. They were expected to abstain from alcohol as well and just abide by the same rules as the women in the organization, and they also had to pay the 50 cents. So another big part of the temperance movement was the Prohibition Party. So the Prohibition Party was kind of the governmental side of the temperance movement. So they had a lot of push in the government, and they really advocated for the complete ban on alcohol, the manufacturing, the selling, the consumption, everything. And we know that as the 18th Amendment. There was also another part of the temperance movement called the Anti-Saloon League. Now, this movement was primarily men. I do believe that women were allowed to join, but it was primarily men. This movement was also highly supported by Protestant ministers and their congregations, so it was a very big movement. It was led by Wayne Wheeler, and one of his tactics in this party was to use something called pressure politics, which basically was using the media and using behind-the-scenes tactics to kind of push politicians to action against alcohol. Another thing that the Anti-Saloon League did was open a publishing house, and they published anti-liquor, anti-alcohol publications every month. And slowly, using these tactics, Americans began to kind of change their view of alcohol and started to support the temperance movement. So another big supporter of the temperance movement was Susan B. Anthony. We all know that name. She really advocated for the ban on alcohol because she saw firsthand the violence against women that the alcohol caused, and so she was very for the ban on alcohol. Despite consumption being made legal in 1933, a lot of these Americans decided just to abstain from alcohol, and these three parties had a lot to do with that decision. And I think that altogether our country nowadays has a better understanding on the negative effects that alcohol can have, and I think also our authorities just have a better grasp on this situation than they did back in the 19th century. So I think that these three movements, plus many others, really helped guide our country in the right direction. Thank you.